Hey everybody, welcome back to more of the Showdown in the Badlands reveals. This time we are up with Rogue, and Rogue going in a direction I wasn't expecting. I'd say they have two archetypes-ish, but you could kind of mix and mingle between these. The common theme though is that they have the excavation package, and they have the good old thief contraband package again. They are trying to make this work again. It's never worked in the past, but maybe the cards this time will allow it to come to fruition. Spoilers, I don't think it will. First up though, let's look at the excavation package. They have the 1-mana 1/3 weapon, Blood Rock Co Shovel. Death Rattle, excavate a treasure. So we already mentioned this, the excavated cards, like the treasures in there in 1, 2, and 3, on average they're around, like, you know, a decent card level, like a decent draw level, especially when you get up towards the tier 3 and then the tier 4. Typically is a very good card, right? So you expect these cards to be slightly underwhelming. However, I think this Blood Rock Co Shovel is so underwhelming you wouldn't play it in the Excavate deck. Maybe it just sneaks in there, but it's so slow. 1-mana 1/3 weapon, it's going to take 3 turns for you to manually kill it. You can always push the button 1 turn later, I suppose, to break it early. So maybe it'll just see play because you can just break it early. The comparison I'm drawing to this card is Tusk Piercer, which was a Demon Hunter card, which was 1-mana 1/2, Death Rattle, draw a Death Rattle minion. This card saw very, very little play in Death Rattle Demon Hunter, which wasn't a particularly good deck. It would break a turn early, but as I said, they didn't readily have the option to break the weapon themselves. So maybe you will use, you know, your button to break the weapon, get the draw early. But if you treat it like that, it's almost like you've got a 3-mana 1/3 weapon. If you like equilibrate all of those things to draw a card, that's not good value. So I don't know, maybe, but I think not. However, don't worry, excavationists. There is a very good legendary for you to excavate with. We have Drilly the Kid, 4-mana 4/3 mech, Battlecry, Quick Draw, and Death Rattle, excavate a treasure. Alright, this can be kind of seen as potentially 4-mana 4/3, draw 3 cards. That's pretty goddamn good. Looking at the annals of history, Shellfall Battlerin, which is in standard right now, sees play in Death Knight, and it doesn't have the quick draw on it, but it's 3-mana 2/2, which is an understat for 3 mana, similar with Drilly the Kid, it's understated for 4 mana, but draws you 2 cards, and that sees play. Drilly the Quick Kid, you're probably most unlikely to hit the quick draw, at least when you first draw it, and it could give you 2 excavations. Snake Eyes is also something fairly similar. There's not too many cards out there that have an effect that allows you to eventually draw 3 cards from it. Snake Eyes is going to give you 2 guaranteed discoveries, and there's a potential chance to get a 3rd card as well. I think Snake Eyes is going to be pretty decent, so I think Drilly the Kid will also be pretty decent. Also, just to point out, I've been a little bit harsh on the old quick draw mechanic for most of the class cards. However, of all the classes to make quick draw work, Rogue is probably one of the best ones to do. They have plenty of cards that let you bounce things back to hand, like Shadow Step and Breakdance. They have the card that lets you shuffle cards back into your deck and draw more cards. I forgot its name for now. So you could enable the quick draw pretty readily, because if you bounce the card back, you can get the quick draw effect if you play it again. Unfortunately, it's at the 4 mana range, which is a little bit expensive, but its Shadow Step will discount it at the very least. So I could see you running an excavation package where you run the 2-mana neutral, use that to excavate maybe 2 times, and then Drilly the Kid finishes off your excavations. You start bouncing both the 2 cost and the 4 cost card. Maybe the weapon does just sneak into it, but really, you know, all of this is all well and good, me saying this. It does depend what the treasure is, though, and we're going to show that in a moment. Also, just important to note, this has got a mech tag, so maybe you try and run it into your mech rogue deck. Mech rogue deck's pretty aggressive. Maybe they would like a little bit of extra value from the treasure. I don't know, maybe that's where Drilly the Kid sees a bit of play. Here is the treasure, though, for Rogue. Here's your reward for all your excavating, running these... Well, running potentially the bad weapon and bad neutral. The Azurite Scorpion, a 4-mana 5/5 elemental beast. Battlecry, get 4 random spells. If you've excavated 8 times, they cost 0. Alright, that's a lot of value, and here comes my hints earlier. It's Thief Rogue, it's Contraband Rogue, whatever you want to call it. Rogues from other class cards, potentially. This is an enabler for Tess. Tess is still in Standard, you may have forgotten about her because she hasn't got that much support right now. But she still exists. You could see a world where potentially you excavate 8 times, which by the way will give you 2 Scorpions in hand. You play both of them, you get 4 spells, they cost 0. Sorry, you get 8 in total if you play both of them. They cost 0, you play a bunch of spells, you test, get a copy of all those spells again, and you just outvalue the opponent. This is like ultimate value generation, right? More to the point, because the Azurite Scorpion is a Battlecry, you can bounce it with Shadow Step. So as soon as you've hit this, excavate 8 times, and got, your 2 Scorpions, you can bounce one back, play it again, and get 4 more spells that cost 0. Wow, huge value. And Rogue has a precedent even for doing stuff like this. Do you remember back in the old Galakron era? Ignore Yasharaj for now, sorry. But in the Galakron era for Rogue, where I think if you invoked 6 times in total, you got the final stage of Galakron, and his effect I think became draw 4 cards, they cost 0. And you would run this as a Highlander deck with Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, which gave you 2 dragons that cost 0. And that was a value smorgasbord of cards, and it was actually a pretty decent deck. And this was without even, Tess in the reckoning. However, and you might be able to, get towards this, 4 cards in your deck that cost 0 is better than 4 random spells that cost 0. And I'd also argue that 2 random dragons, because dragons typically are high-cost minions, okay, depends on the set a little bit, but at least during that time, the 2 random dragons was probably worth more than the 4 random excavated spells, especially since originally Dragon Queen Alexstrasza could find itself. That did change eventually so that cards couldn't generate themselves. But I think those 2 cards outvalue their Azurite Scorpion. I typically value a random minion, especially with a random minion with a good tribe like Dragon on it, higher than a random spell. There are too many spells in the game that are just too specific or just not good. Also, typically for spells, at the very least, there's not that many at the high end of the curve than there are at the low end of the curve. I've not gone through the pool of spells right now, but I suspect the average spell cost in the game right now is somewhere between 3 and 4, maybe just above 4, that type of area. You're still looking at potentially a 16 mana discount if you excavate 8 times, which is pretty good. There's going to be some times where you play the Azurite Scorpion and get 4 insane spells and you just beat your opponent down. There's sometimes when you generate 4 random spells and it's stuff like, if you've infused with a demon 3 times, summon 3 demons and you just cry. There's going to be stuff in there that is like a board clear, like you're going to get a Brawl, which Tess Greymane doesn't like you playing Brawl because you want to bounce your Tess Greymane back to play it again and again and again. If you destroy your Tess, you can't bounce it. Big sad times. I've also thrown on here Yasharaj the Defiler, just as an example of this. The more specific you get for the pool of cards you're targeting that will cost 0, typically the better the card is. Yasharaj found you copies of corrupted cards you played this game that they cost 0. This saw them playing Control Warlock. But again, I think this Yasharaj the Defiler is possibly better than the Azurite Scorpion. Probably better, in fact. And actually, the card I would compare this to the most is this bad boy, who's still in Standard, Jackpot. Okay, you don't get the discount on the card. You discover 2 spells from other classes that cost 5 or more and put them in your hand. If anyone else has played this, especially when Contraband and Stash was a thing, and arguably this deck was at its most powerful, the amount of times you'd play Jackpot and you'd get 2 truly awful spells, or spells that meant that you didn't want to play them because it would kill Tess, or it's stuff you couldn't play, or, it's just that type of thing. I think Azurite Scorpion is just, you release the mask and it's like, who was the villain? Oh, it turns out it was the Azurite, turns out it was Jackpot. It's basically like playing Jackpot. Obviously, you know, at the very least, the problem with Jackpot was you would have like 5 mana spell that does nothing. If you can excavate 8 times, at least the spell will do nothing for 0 mana, which is actually not a terrible deal, strangely. But I just don't see it, especially compared to some of the decks right now. Rogue is sporting arguably a tier 1 deck in your Secret Rogue package with the concoctions. And I just don't think this random generation of spells, nor in the excavated cards, are going to cut the mustard. If it was going to cut the mustard, though, you'd probably be looking at putting it in with the secret package for that matter, just to try and, you know, the secret package can cause your opponent to lose cards in the hand. The excavation package is going to add lots of cards to your hand, so you'll always have the hand advantage, which means that even if you generate some bad cards, it kind of doesn't matter. You still have more options than your opponent. The biggest thing that hurts this deck, though, is this card is not in standard, Contraband Stash. It was such a big payoff for your Thief, Contraband, Rogue decks that you could get this 5 mana spell, replay 5 cards from other classes that you played this game. It just gave you an additional value that if you lost tests, you still had the Contraband Stash to fall back on. You could also generate copies of these spells via the 0 mana shadowy spell, I forgot what it's called now, or Queen A. She could also generate a copy of Contraband Stash. You could play it like 4 times in a game. Without that, and you're just relying on tests to get additional value on this card, I don't think it's going to work out. And also, as I've said, you're probably going to want to bounce Drilly the Kid to get more excavation procs. You then want to bounce the Azerite Scorpion to get more cards. You want to bounce Tester because Test gives you the ultimate value. You don't have that many bounce options. There are 4 cards, which is more than, you know, actually there's 5 in total, but I don't think you're playing Bounce Around featuring Garona. You're probably running Breakdance, you're probably running Shadow Step, you might run the spells that, you know, copy spells, so maybe you get a bit more than that, but I just don't see the package coming together. The other payoff for the excavations, by the way, is actually a card I think is pretty good. Antique Flinger, 4 mana 5/4 minion. Battlecry, if you've excavated twice, destroy an enemy minion. That's right, if you don't like an opponent's minion, you give them the Flinger instead and just get rid of those bad boys. Now, if you play Drilly the Kid 1 time, there's a decent chance, unless it's silenced, that you're going to get the excavation twice. So it's actually not too hard compared to the other excavation cards and other classes to enable. And destroy an enemy minion is currently valued in the game with Assassinate at 4 mana. It's a bit of an unfair comparison though, because Assassinate's the 0 play in any decks right now, so... But even if you treat this as like a 3 mana card, which I think maybe Assassinate then actually gets into decks, you're kind of seeing your Antique Flinger as a 1 mana 5/4. That is really good value. Very good card. And the other good card to compare this to is Vilespine Slayer, which saw a lot of play... I can't remember when this came back out. Was it the Witchwood this came out in? Which was a 5 mana 3/4 combo Destroyer minion. The combo was easier to enable on Vilespine than Antique Flinger, but it was understated, and Antique Flinger's actually statted pretty nicely. Even if you don't excavate this and, you know, you're playing a tempo matchup, you could throw this bad boy on the board at 4 mana, you don't get its effect, and feel okay about life. More random card generation. We have the Shell Game. 3 mana, get a random epic, rare, and common card from other classes. You just don't learn your lesson, old man. This has never worked before in any of the Contraband decks. It's too unspecific. This will not see play in the Contraband deck. We've had examples of cards like this in the past. We've had Pilfer. Very rarely saw play, and this was 1 mana. Burgle, I think, is probably his best comparison, which was 3 random cards from your opponent's class. Burgle saw basically 0 play. But at least you have a smaller pool to, you know, play around and know if playing Burgle is worth it or not. Clever Disguise did actually see very little play because at least it's giving you spells, which is a smaller pool than just, you know, the epic, rare, and common cards from other classes. Shell Game might as well just say, give me 3 random cards. Okay, it has to be from another class, so it's not going to be in the neutral pool. The problem is, though, you know the common card is going to be a bad card. The epic card you would think would be a really good card, but often epics are actually cards that enable other packages. So you might generate a card that is specific for another package and won't work in your deck. So it probably leaves the rare card, and rares are typically, you know, decent cards from what at least when I skim read through the package. So you can kind of see this as 3 mana generate 2 potentially bad cards, 1 decent card. That is not great value. Even though, you know, 3 mana draw 3, it's not really 3 mana draw 3. It's worse. So I don't think Shell Game will see any play. Stick Up. Discover a quick draw card from another class for 1 mana. Now you might think I'm going to go in hard on this card. I've basically said all the other quick draw cards are garbage, which was a little bit unfair. I just think that they're too specific in their interaction versus like the payoff and the original card. I was sitting down last night actually looking at the quick draw card, and I think my problem is the base quick draw card is typically, you know, undervalued, which makes sense. And then the quick draw effect, I think, is typically worth somewhere around 2 mana. Again, don't quote me on this one, but this is like the ballpark I would evaluate it at. So obviously the quick draw effect is pretty good for you to get off, but it's not like groundbreaking. Like you would build the deck around shuffling your hand back into your deck to get the quick draws again. And if you draw one of these at like inopportune moments, it's just going to be big sad times. You're just going to have a bad card in your hand. However, Stick Up does get around that. I think discovering a quick draw card is better than putting a quick draw card in your deck, because we know that most of quick draw cards right now are 4 mana or less. And in fact, I think from other classes it is 4 mana or less, because the most expensive one is the Dragon from Neutral, which is 6 mana, and is big sad times if you would generate that quick draw card. This one, though, if you're at 5 mana, you've got a good chance that you're going to play Stick Up and be able to play the quick draw card, in which case the card is actually better than an average card. So right now there's 8 quick draw cards that have been announced. So this pool will change as the set is finalized. And there's not many classes left, though. There's only, I think, Paladin and Warrior hasn't been announced, and that's about it. Wait, there must be another one. Who else is missing from here? Scans. I don't see it. There's another one. Whatever. These are the 8 cards I have right now. And I've kind of color graded these as cards that are good to generate from the quick draw from Stick Up, and then cards that are also good to play with Tess, because I think you'd be playing this with Tess as like your full Thief Rogue package. There are 2 cards I think are very good. Silver Serpent, Rush Poisonous, quick draw, gain immune this turn. Good single target removal is a very good card to generate with Tess as well, because you can rush it on the turn you play Tess to kill another minion on your opponent's board. Heatwave is specifically enemy minions, which is very good. Again, the quick draw is decent. It is a bit more conditional. I think Silver Serpent is a better reward. But in the future, if you're playing your Tesses and you know the Heatwave is going to do some enemy board clear, that's a quite nice way to build the Tess. If you're building Tess in such a way that it builds your board up and hits your opponent's board, that is obviously the winner's choice. What I don't know about Tess is, and someone might be able to clarify this in the comments, I think you won't get it. I assume you don't get the quick draw effect from Tess, because it doesn't go into your hand. You're just playing copies of the cards you've played this game. So I think you won't get the quick draw effect. So I'm also looking at that when I'm evaluating these cards, that when you play as Tess, you don't get the quick draw effect. Otherwise, the evaluation of some of these actually changes slightly. In the next category, my yellow category, Farmhand and Benevolent Banker. Benevolent Banker is actually pretty good to generate from Stick Up. You're going to steal a card from the opponent's deck. I didn't notice this at the time when I rated Benevolent Banker. I still think this is a pretty bad card, by the way, for Priest. But you don't discover a copy of a spell from your opponent's deck. You actually get the spell, so you're stealing it from their deck. Which is real good if you're playing against a combo deck and you hit one of their big key pieces. And it's a discover, so you have a decent chance of finding it. So I think Stick Up could be pretty good in this deck as well, because you're going to steal, obviously, a class card, and it's a class card you'd want to play with Tess. So that's a pretty good reward. Unfortunately, once you played it with Tess, it had a battle cry, so you're only getting a 2/4 stat from it. But hey, it's still 2/4 in stats, right? Similarly, the Farmhand is a 3 mana 4/3 undead. It has a battle cry of discovering undead. If it's quick drawn, it costs 2 less. That's pretty good value again. Unfortunately, when you play it with Tess, you're not going to get the battle cry or the quick draw. So it's just a body. But it's a bigger body than Benevolent Banker. Like, Banker I think is better to get from Stick Up, and Farmhand's better to get from Tess. But they're both average. Then I have my orange tier of Dehydrate and Trolley Problem. So Trolley Problem is insane to generate from Stick Up, because the quick draw effect is really, really good for Rogue. Unlike Warlock, who wants to, discard their spells, or at least have some synergy with discarding spells, Rogue doesn't have that exactly. So, the quick draw is great. It's 3 mana for 6/6 of fast stats. That's exactly what you want. And on paper, it's not bad with Tess, especially if you consider that you might generate a really bad spell that might, cost 0. In which case, playing Trolley Problem from Tess might discard this really annoying card that you didn't want in your hand anyway, and you have no downside. The reason I put it in the orange tier is I think the most frequent situation that's going to happen when you play it with Tess is that you're going to get the Trolley Problem. It's going to discard your lowest cost spell in your hand, because I don't think you're going to get the quick draw effect. And the lowest cost card in your hand will typically be one of your bounce cards. It's going to be Shadow Step or Breakdance. And they are the cards that you want to bounce Tess back with, so you're going to lose a bounce of Tess when you play the Trolley Problem. It might be enough to push through the value on that one turn, so the juice might be worth the squeeze. So it's not the absolute worst tier, but I think you have to be very careful if you play Trolley Problem in this archetype. Similarly, Dehydrate has Lifesteal, deal 4 damage to a minion. Quick draw, it costs 1. So obviously if you draw it with Stick Up, it's 1 mana, deal 4 damage to a minion, you Lifesteal. Rogue doesn't have a lot of access to healing, so the Lifesteal can actually be the difference between you losing and winning a game. Unfortunately, it doesn't specify an enemy minion, so when you play this with Tess, you can hit your own board, including Tess. And as I said, you don't want to destroy your own Tess typically. However, the reason I cannot put it in red tier is that Rogue, as I just said, lacks healing, so sometimes dehydrating and it hitting one of your minions, it might actually just be worth it. If Tess lives as well, she has 6 health, and you gain 4 health and you bounce the Tess back, who cares? No harm, no foul, right? The two that I think are the weakest are, at least from the 8 we've seen so far, Pocket Sand and Rehydrate. So Rehydrate, when you generate it from Stick Up, is effectively restore 7 health for 0 mana. That's a pretty good deal. Again, Rogue doesn't have a lot of access to healing, so that's good, right? Potentially wrong, because when you play this with Tess, it doesn't specify an ally health, it doesn't specify a minion health. So you might hit your opponent with this and heal them for 7, which will be big sad times. So I think for that reason, Rehydrate is going to be something you're going to play if you need... I say you need to heal. I think you'll probably just play it regardless, but you'll always know in the back of your head you might heal the opponent for 7 in the future. But hopefully the value you generate from your Tess is worth potentially healing your opponent for 7. So maybe Rehydrate I think is the better of the two. The weakest one I think is Pocket Sand though. It's 2 mana, deal 3 damage. Quick draw, your opponent's card... next card costs 1 more. It's decent from Stick Up to make your opponent's card cost 1 more. It makes it harder for them to deal with your board. Unfortunately, I don't think you're going to get the quick draw effect, which means it's just deal 3 damage. It's not targeted. It might hit your minions, it might hit Tess, it might hit your face. So, I think it's a pretty weak get altogether. But in general, I think these actual quick draw cards aren't too bad, and maybe Stick Up and maybe the quick draw card actually sees play in this contraband rogue type deck. Alright, now we go to the other archetype. And this kind of overlaps somewhat with this Thief Rogue deck as well. And this is like a coin generation machine. 3 mana 3/4, Bounty Wrangler, quick draw, or combo, get a coin. I don't know if we've ever seen this text before in a card before. At least not a druid card. An or criteria. Let me know in the comments below if it has been seen before. I don't remember it, at the very least. This is pretty decent, honestly. It's a reasonable stat line for 3 mana 3/4. If you get the quick draw or the combo off, you can kind of see the coin as like a 1 mana refund, in which case you could kind of treat this as a 2 mana 3/4. However, the coin holds more value than that, so we'll get to that later. 3 mana is reasonably cheap. It's not guaranteed you're going to get the quick draw off on this one, but I think it'll be worth holding for a combo, and typically Rogue has a lot of cheap spells, so you're going to be able to enable the combo in this with relative ease. The comparison to this is Tomb Pillager. Tomb Pillager did see play way back when. This was 4 mana 6/4, so you'd argue it's a little bit understated compared to the... Actually, no, it's probably around about the same statted as Bounty Wrangler, but it was slower in its action of getting the coin. It was on a death rattle, so you could play around it a little bit. We also have Dart Throw, 2 mana spell. Throw 2 damage darts at random enemy minions. If both hit the same minion, get a coin. What a weird text. Like, there's not a lot of stuff to really compare this to. The closest I can see from Rogue is Wanted, which was a 4-mana spell that dealt 3 damage to a minion. If you killed it, you added the coin to your hand. It really depends on how much you want the coins. Spoiler, you want the coins. As to whether or not you would run these cards. I mean, you can't run Wanted, that's not in Standard, but when Wanted was in Standard, it was like you want the coin for some reason, right? You're kind of jumping through hoops to get a coin. At the very least, if Dart Throw does hit the same minion, and it's statted in such a way that the most likely turns where your opponent's going to have the fewest minions is early in the game, right? So, if Dart Throw does hit the same minion twice, you're probably killing it at, like, you know, turn 2, turn 3. And you get a coin, which is kind of like treated as 1 mana, deal 2 damage to 2 random enemies. Enemy minion, sorry, which is reasonable value, but not fantastic. If you don't hit the same minion, it's a pretty meh card. It can also be hit with spell damage in case you wanted to do that, but I don't think you do. Right, here is the big payoff. Why have you been generating all your coins? Do you want to throw it into some predatory game like, you know, Silent Hill Ascension, which is awful, or do you want to spend your money in a better way and throw it down the wishing well? 5 mana 0/7. After you play a coin, get a random legendary minion from another class, and it's set its cost to 1. This is an insane payoff. What a card! So on turn 5, assuming, you know, you generated a coin, you drop down your wishing well, you throw your coin out there, you get a legendary minion from another class. The legendary pool is typically, you know, great cards. You'll have that 1 mana from the coin, and the card will cost 1 mana, and you can just play a legendary minion. That could be disgusting. I mean, I'm not going to go through, you know, the whole legendary pool, but you could be hitting, like, 8/8s and stuff. You can be hitting... Man, you could hit some really frustrating things with, like, you know, death rattles on it. And more to the point, copying random legendary minions with Tess, I think is going to be better than random spells. So I actually think Tess is most likely to go into this Wishing Well deck. It'll be interesting to see, though. I guess the quality of Wishing Well will depend on how easy it is to generate coins, and there's not that many ways in Rogue right now. The 2 cards we saw before are 2 of the ways. Then Coppertail Snoop is another way, but obviously you would typically want to run that in a mech package. Maybe, though, the coin is so good that you'll run Coppertail Snoop in this Wishing Well package, maybe with a small mech pool so you can magnetize and get a coin payoff. And also, do you remember way back when in the neutrals I said Greedy Partner was probably the most likely of the partner cards to see play, because the coin can be pretty useful. 0 mana spells, very useful. There's a lot of 2 mana spells as well, or 2 mana cards, sorry, even, in Rogue. So I actually could see the payoff from Wishing Well being so good that you'll run Greedy Partner in the deck to potentially give you a additional coin. Or if, you know, you don't have it and you need to play for tempo, you can get a 2 mana 2/3. Not great, but c'est la vie. And as I said, I think this will be the big payoff for playing Tess in your deck. Don't, you know, get baited in by these random excavations and all that jazz. Instead, throw Wishing Well in your deck, throw the coin generators in there, and eventually you're going to generate a bunch of legendaries and play Tess and just overwhelm your opponent. I think that is going to be a legitimate win condition. Also, Wishing Well is not a legendary, so you can have 2 copies in the deck, so it's easy to fish it out. And it's stacked in such a way that it's going to be really annoying to kill that thing. 7 health? That's a tough kill at turn 5. And now we get to the final card reveal. I should have mentioned at the very beginning, there is one legendary that's being saved to BlizzCon, so there is one more card from the set we've not seen. And I honestly have no read on what card it's going to be. But anyway, the final card we're going to see for now is 777s, which doesn't fit in with any of the other cards. 7 mana, deal 7 damage to a minion, draw 7 cards. Sprint is in Shambles, which is 6 mana, draw 4 cards. This is 7 mana, draw 7, deal 7 damage. Do I think this will see any play in any of the decks? No. Absolutely not. So, I've played a lot of Contraband Rogue back in the past. That deck has no issue with drawing cards, or typically has very little issue with drawing cards. You're generating so many cards, in fact, that typically the issue is playing the cards fast enough. So 777s will not go into this contraband deck, at the very least. I don't think it'll go in the Wishing Well deck. I don't think it'll go into the secret package. Sprint did see some play in Miracle Rogue. Miracle Rogue isn't really seeing any play right now. Maybe 777s goes into the Miracle Rogue deck as a one-off, just in case, you know, the big taunt minions in your way. You use 777s to deal 7 damage to it. You draw 7 cards. Some of those will be 0-cost cards that you can just vomit out. Maybe that's the world where you see it, but I just think it's too weak. I think 7 mana draw 7 is not good enough anymore. And in fact, it does become a point where drawing too many cards is actually a downside, because you're not going to have... It's pretty rare that you're going to have 3 or fewer cards in your hand. So you're going to overdraw, and then you're going to overdraw your important cards and have sad times. I assume then the only other deck you might want to run this in is some sort of aggro deck where you're just vomiting out your cards as quickly as, you know, as quickly as you possibly can. However, 7 mana is so expensive for an aggressive deck like that you've probably died if you've played 777, so... I don't know, maybe like a Pirate Rogue might consider running this, but I just don't see it. Another card to compare this to as well is Ultimate Infestation, which was a back-breaking card way back when, but I still think this is better now. Also, it got nerfed, which is one of the other things. But dealing 5 damage, drawing 5 cards, gaining 5 armor, and summoning a 5/5 ghoul, as a package, I think is better than 7... draw 7 and deal 7 damage to a minion. Also, Ultimate Infestation could go face. This can't go face. And the sad thing for 777s is this card can't ever really be buffed or nerfed, because obviously the flavor of the text is it wants 7s across the board, so sadly I think 777s is the card that will never ever see any play. Anyway, that'll do it for the Rogue reveals. Well, it will do it for now for the Rogue reveals. We have one Legendary that's going to be released at BlizzCon. Hopefully that will help tie the package together in some way. I hope it lets you that's my biggest hope. It lets you play cards from other classes, because otherwise, if Tess is on the bottom of your deck, you're just going to have big sad times, right? You really need that big value generation turn. Without it, it's a nothing deck. But so far from the cards I've seen, I don't think we've seen anything that's going to trouble any of the Tier 1 decks out there right now. And I probably see this sitting somewhere in Tier 3, maybe even Tier 4, honestly. But yeah, anyway. Next up, I think, is the Paladin reveals. I nearly said Priest, but it's Paladin. And in fact, some of them started to be drip-fed, so hopefully I'll do one of those videos later, assuming all the cards come out, and see what they have to offer. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.